pompous self-involvement begin? How pompous is he, you ask, when I write your dialogue? Well, I would like to start my set this evening with a poem. I will tell you how I came to write this poem. Last spring, I had to go down to West Hollywood to have a meeting with a producer who wanted to give me rewrite notes on a screenplay he had previously said was perfect. For those of you who are not in the entertainment industry, I should explain producers are very much like dogs. The more they like a thing, the more they need to pee on it. And this producer likes me a lot. So I had to go to West Hollywood to be figuratively peed on, which is one of the top 10 reasons people go to West Hollywood. An irony in that literally being peed on is one of the top 3. So, you need to know, to understand this story, that I am compulsively punctual. But I am also neurotically status conscious. So I tend to get places early, but I never want to be the first one to arrive. I wound up in West Hollywood, dressed up for a meeting, with about an hour and a half to kill. So I went into a coffee house. Men, let me just take a moment to give you this piece of advice. If you ever feel a little less than perfectly attractive, a little bit as though you are past your prime, a little bit as though you are no longer appealing, dress as though you have a meeting, go to a West Hollywood coffee house. It's worth the flight. I was getting checked out like the Kama Sutra at a middle school library. And I'm not particularly homophobic, so for me, that's just ego stroking. As far as homophobia is, there's a form of bigotry that I don't understand at all. I don't get what there is to be afraid of in gay men. It's not as though there are packs of gay men roaming the countryside, filleting straight men against their will. That has never happened. You know, we know that's never happened, because no man has ever been filleted against his will. That's mine. I'm a happily married heterosexual man, so I've got a fairly close shave, and he makes an offer. I gotta give it thought before there's a straight up or down answer. That's all I'm saying. Because, come on, that's like birthday cake. You don't get one that often. When you do, you don't care if it's not exactly the kind you were hoping for. The country is finally starting to get bad. Anyone who's watched Bravo knows gay is the new black. I TiVo Project Runway. I love, because Tim Gunn, what a sweetheart of a mensch of a man. I don't have a homosexual bone in my body, but if I did, it would be his. The bigots on the right so desperately want to make this an issue. They can't figure out how to do it without acknowledging that it's bigotry. When it was about gays in the military, they were making up the excuses, oh, it's going to hurt morale if we let gays in the military. No, that's not going to happen. All right, look. You find yourself fighting in Afghanistan, in the mountains, pinned down under heavy enemy fire. Don't you think the guy next to you is more likely to save your life if he's in love with you? I don't care what he thinks he's saving my ass for, just as long as he's getting saved. If my life is on the line, I want to be the most popular guy in the barracks. Candy, flowers for everyone. And then the gay marriage thing, oh, we have to protect the sanctity of marriage. No, you don't. You don't even want to. Because if you were worried about protecting the sanctity of marriage, you wouldn't prevent people who are in love from getting married. You would outlaw divorce and unanticipated weight gain. I digress. I'm in West Hollywood. I'm waiting for this meeting. I'm sitting in a coffee house. And there are two men sitting at tables next to one another. They're not together, but they're each sketching in a big notepad. This is the day that the judge is going to rule on Prop 8. And these two men are both engaged in the same exploration of the same fantasy, but they're coming at it from slightly different directions. Each of them is designing his ideal wedding card against the chance that he will have an opportunity to wear it. One of them is working on a beautiful long gown with a train and a cummerbund and a bow tie. And the other one has a plan for a tuxedo with a veil and lace. And it's just... And as I'm watching them, they're starting to notice one another's work, and they're starting to get curious. And I was reminding them of an event that had taken place many years earlier, the second time I went to hear my sister speak in New York. Before I get to the first time I went to hear my sister speak in New York, I heard her at NYU. And I don't want to date myself, but Ronald Reagan was president, though he did not know it at the time. It was that. I don't know if any of you will remember, but he had his welfare reform proposal that was based on the concept that the best way to discourage people from being poor is to take away their money. And my sister had put together a brilliant lecture on this that she was doing at NYU, because she took it very personally. My sister is my sister is gay. I love her like a brother. And she is the single mother of a beautiful daughter who was deliberately conceived in a loving act between my sister and a turkey baster that was briefly filled with male sperm. One of the reasons I will no longer eat dinner at my sister's place. Mom, get that out of the butter. You don't know where it's been. And she was briefly on government assistance, not because she's lazy or a slacker, but because she had been fired from a bartending job because she was caught on a break breastfeeding her infant in a back room. Understand, this is an establishment that proudly displays posters of the Coors Girls. Because we live in a bizarre society where it's okay to use breasts to sell beer, but not to feed children. So I had gotten to hear this fairly brilliant lecture of mine. So the first time she did that at NYU, and I came out of the lecture hall, and it was 11:30, 11:45 at night, and it was January, very cold in Manhattan. And I don't know if you know the land, she was up at Columbia for this one. The other one was NYU, this was Columbia, so we were up north on the island. And I was in an area that a middle-class white kid should not be, as it's nearing midnight. And I was sitting at a bus stop waiting for the bus with my breath steaming in the night air, and I was a victim of the world's stupidest mugging. A man came out of the building, a large African-American man came out of the, well, it was the mid-80s, so he was still a big black guy. He came out of the building and he sat down next to me. And we sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the night air. And after like 5 or 6 minutes, he said, "Give me all your money." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm mugging you. Give me all your money." And I said, "Well, do you have a knife or something?" And he said, "If you want, I can go in and get a knife." I did not want that. So I gave him the $6 that I had in my pocket. And then we sat together waiting for the bus. With our breath steaming in the night air until I realized there was a problem. I said, "Well, now I can't get on the bus." And he said, "Oh, sorry," and handed back $1, which was at the time the cost of a bus ride in Manhattan, and I took the $1. And he said, "Thank you." My mother. And we sat together waiting for the bus, with our breath steaming in the cold night air. And finally the bus came, and I got on, I fed my $1 into the machine, and I thought about saying to the bus driver lady, "Hey, this guy just mugged me, but Now it was $5 he'd taken, so it felt less like reporting a crime than telling on a guy. So I just paid my $1 and got on and sat down. He paid $1 and got on and sat down a few rows behind me. And after we traveled a few blocks together, he tapped me on the shoulder and I said, "What?" And he held out 2 of the remaining $4. And I said, "Well, why don't you take some of this money back? You really always ought to have some cash on you." Seemed sensible, so I took the $2 and said thank you to my mother. And we rode on. And after a few more blocks, he rang the bell to signal the driver that he wanted to get off. And as he was pulling over the curb, the guy came up and tapped me on the shoulder again. I said, "What?" And he held out the last $2 sort of sheepishly and said, "Yeah, I really just needed bus fare. Why don't you take the rest of this cash?" It dawned on me for the first time that we live in a bizarre society where it's less humiliating to be a criminal than a little short on cash. By now I felt like I had bonded with my mother. I pushed the $2 back into his hand and said, "Why don't you hang on to that? You really always ought to have some cash on you." And he said thank you and got off the bus. The bus driver caught the tail end of this exchange in the rearview mirror, and apparently she was a staunch Reagan Republican, because as we pulled away from the curb, she said, "You know, you really shouldn't give them poor people money. It only encourages them." But that wasn't the time I went to see my sister that I was going to tell you about. The second time I went to see my sister speak was, this was the time that was at NYU. I did a whole trip to visit my family. It started in New Jersey. I did my last visit with my grandmother before Alzheimer's rendered her incapable of recognizing me. With a very difficult, I don't know if any of you have dealt with this with a loved one, but she just reached that point in the disease where every conversation has become a surreal 1970s game show. I went into that place with the buildings and the smell, Manhattan, yes! I was with that lady with the flowered dress, and Sarah, no! She's short and she walks funny. And Katie, I don't know. Bad breath, long boring stories. Your best friend, Denise. Yes! And we saw that man who's awful. I need more clues. He used to be horrible in New York, and then he was horrible all over the country, and he was horrible from space. Howard Stern, yes! Congratulations, Grandma. You're going under the dementia pyramid. Who are you people? Things you say at the dinner table. Where am I? Things you shout from the bathroom. Ed Asner, Benjamin Netanyahu, people you mistake for your dead husband. And on that same trip, my mother was all freaked out. "Oh, Dylan, you have to tell me if I start to show these symptoms at all, because I have to know when it's time to take my own life." I said, "Mom, we just had this conversation 20 minutes ago." There are some rooms where the whole room just goes cold on me. Oh, you don't make jokes about that. That's tragic. And I hate that. They just get judgmental like that. It was my grandmother who taught me we are Jews. We do not believe in tragedy. We believe in horror, atrocity, and injustice. And we recognize them all as hilarious. She used to be so funny. When I was like 8, I went to her and said, Grandma, I'm going to camp. I'm going to ride horses. I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to the beach. She said, "Really? I went to a camp once." Spent 9 months of my life in a yard playing liar's poker with the Jews and the queers. Pair of 3s. 3 5s. Do not gangrel me, people. Do you know how sharp you have to be to win with the same numbers every day? And then the next leg of the trip was up to Boston, where my parents actually live, and I saw my dad. Now, before I tell you this, understand, my dad is not an idiot. My dad was the associate provost for the arts at MIT for 10 years, or as most people pronounce it, arts at MIT. And it was really a perfect job for him right there at the intersection of art and science. I went up, on this trip I got to see his Heisenberg Uncertainty opera. And epic musicality, which it's possible to accurately determine either the position or the momentum of the fat lady at any given time. It's a show that cannot find its natural resolution if anyone is there to see it. Really, people would leave the theater every night going, what about the cat in the box? Was the cat in the box okay? It was a very moving, wow, when you go boogie work together. That was wild. We like him, we like him, we like him. No, Heisenberg joke, no. And he got the job when a member of the search committee happened to be in England and saw his Cambridge University Physics Department production of The Pirates of Penzance, starring Professor Stephen Hawking as the Pirate King. The singing wasn't great, but the choreography was innovative. And again, you don't have to worry about laughing at the joke. Professor Hawking himself has heard me tell that joke, and he tells me I'm a very funny man. Although, in fairness, it's impossible to tell when he's being sarcastic. In any case, my father is not an idiot. But when I went to the he said, Dylan, I've been listening to I got this subliminal self-help program on CD. It's amazing. I've never felt better in my life. This is the best program in the world. You must buy the whole set. You must buy the whole set. So I got them. And it just, it sounds like the waves. I put them on when I'm going to sleep, and I put them on, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I bought them and I listened to it. And I have to tell you, I've never felt better in my life. It is the best program in the world. You must buy the whole set. You must buy the whole set. Oh, right. So I wound up at the end of this long trip down in New York to hear my sister on Halloween evening speaking at NYU. This was when the second George Bush was president, and he was pushing the marriage incentive as his welfare. This is based on the concept that the best way to instill a sense of independence and self-sufficiency in a woman is through a state-mandated marriage of fiduciary convenience. I'm sorry, a sacred state-mandated marriage of fiduciary convenience. So she was speaking at NYU, and as you may or may not know, I am compulsively punctual, but I am also neurotically status conscious. So on Halloween evening, I wound up in Greenwich Village with an hour and a half to give. Let me just take a moment to say to everybody in this audience, if you ever feel a little off the norm, a little left or right of centrist, if you ever feel as though you cannot fit in anywhere, spend Halloween evening in Greenwich Village. It's worth the flight. It is such a wonderful place. Men everywhere are dressed up in their happiest fantasies. Men who have been out of the closet for decades have found deeper, darker closets with new wardrobe to pull out and try on. It is the most wonderful place you will ever be. It is Mardi Gras, only they mean it. They're not doing it for the tourists. And I've got all this time to kill, and I'm wandering around the village, checking it out, and I find myself waiting at a crosswalk next to a leather couple. It's a young man in a leather Speedo and combat boots, and his master who's wearing ass chaps and a cop's hat, and I can only describe this thing as a scribble sling. And I could tell he was the master because he was holding the other guy's leash. And I thought, we live in a wonderful universe where if you wait long enough and you're open enough to the possibilities, anyone can find somebody to love who will make you back. And I smiled at them, and they smiled at me. And we waited for the light to change. And then perpendicular to us, coming up the street, was another couple. They were dressed as sperm for the holiday. They were wearing white leotards and white tights, and they had long toilet paper tails that spiraled out behind them like ribbons as they danced up. And in case we couldn't tell what they were singing "Sperm, Glorious Sperm." I don't remember the whole song. Jizz in my mustache, whatever. And they on the street. And the leather boy slave turned to his leather boy master and said, "Freaks." find somebody to judge harshly for their decisions. And all of this flashed through my mind as I was sitting in this coffee house watching these two men sketching, and they're noticing one another's sketch pads, and they're moving closer and closer together, and they're becoming interested in one another. And on any other day, they might have seen one another and rolled their eyes and gone their separate ways and never spoken again. But today they were waiting to hear about the judge's decision, and in this moment they were suspended in the possibility inherent in the litigation of the marital semantic. And all things were possible. And in this moment it occurred to me that I might be looking at the beginning of a great and lasting romance. And that's when I wrote this poem, with which I would like to start tonight's set. This is called Corner of Starbucks and Christopher Street. Sharpie marked cups play name tag. Rich, dark Colombian meets slightly bitter French. A pretentious morning blend. They come together and claim to seek no more than the hot foam and the sweet macchiato. Thank you. Applause. I think we know the way to a performer's heart is through his ego. And the way to a performer's ego is a well-worn path across the fields of self-interest, into the underbrush of despair, move into the forest of self-hatred, take a left at the weeping parents worshipping at the altar of unfulfilled potential, and then just search for the great gaping maw of need whose infantile wailing can be briefly stilled by your applause or good scotch. And let's continue to pretend I'm drinking coffee.